Marcus Holloway stood in the marble foyer of his estate, staring at a bank notification on his phone. Someone had used his black card, not for jewelry or designer handbags, not for a vacation or a car, for children's art supplies. $73.16 at a community center in the East District, miles from the gated silence of his world. The maid he'd hired 2 months ago had taken it by mistake when she left yesterday evening, slipped it into her coat pocket along with her own card after he'd handed both to her at the kitchen island, distracted by a call from his attorney. He'd realized the error an hour later but hadn't bothered to text her. It was Sunday. She'd return it Monday. But now, looking at that receipt, he felt something crack open inside him. Something he'd sealed tight since the accident 3 years ago. Since his wife died. Since his daughter stopped speaking. The house exhaled cold air through vents hidden in crown molding. Sunlight fell through tall windows onto floors so polished they looked wet. Every surface gleamed. Every corner held nothing but emptiness arranged with precision. His daughter's room was upstairs, door half open, always half open, because the nurse said she needed to hear movement in the hall, needed to know she wasn't alone. But she was alone. They both were, and Marcus had stopped pretending otherwise. He walked to the kitchen, phone still in his hand. The notification glowed. Art supplies, crayons, watercolor sets, construction paper, glue sticks, a small easel. He thought of Elena, the maid, quiet, careful, always on time, always efficient. She cleaned without noise. He folded laundry into shapes so neat they looked architectural, left meals covered in glass containers with reheating instructions, written in small, even script. She never asked questions, never lingered, never looked at him the way others did, with that mix of pity and fascination reserved for men who'd lost everything and still owned everything. But she'd looked at his daughter. He'd seen it once, through a gap in the doorway. Elena pausing at the threshold of the playroom, watching Lily sit motionless in her wheelchair, head turned toward the window, hands limp in her lap. The nurse had been adjusting the IV drip. Elena had stood there for a long moment, her face unreadable, before she'd moved on. He thought nothing of it then. Now he wondered what she'd seen. If you've ever watched someone you love disappear inside themselves, you know that hope becomes dangerous. You learn to live in the cold space where expectation dies. And if you're finding yourself in that same cold space right now, wondering if there's a way back, stay close. Because sometimes the truth isn't where you've been looking. Marcus set the phone on the counter and they stared at the gleaming espresso machine, the knife block arranged by size, the bowl of decorative lemons no one would ever eat. Everything in its place, everything controlled. He'd built an empire on control, contracts, precision, the elimination of variables. But this small, unexplained purchase felt like a variable he hadn't accounted for. And variables, in his experience, either solved problems or created them. He needed to know which this was. Monday morning arrived with fog pressed against the windows. Elena came through the service entrance at 7, as she always did, her coat damp from the walk up the drive. She hung it in the staff closet, smoothed her hair back into its tight bun, and pulled on the pale gray uniform that made her nearly invisible against the stone walls. She moved through the kitchen like water, quiet and efficient, starting the coffee, setting out fresh fruit, checking the temperature of the refrigerator where the nurse kept Lily's specialized meal supplements. She didn't look at Marcus when he entered, though she must have known he was there. She simply nodded, a small dip of her chin, and held out his black card on her open palm. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low and steady. "I realized it last night. I should have called." Marcus took the card. Their fingers didn't touch. "The art supplies," he said. She went still. Not frozen, just still, the way prey goes still when it's deciding whether to run or hold ground. Then she met his eyes and he saw something flicker there. Not fear, something sharper. "I'll return them," she said. "I can bring a check tomorrow." "I didn't ask you to return them." He slid the card into his wallet. "I asked about them." Elena's hands, which had been folded at her waist, tightened slightly. "There's a community program," she said, "for children, art therapy. I volunteer on Sunday afternoons." She paused. "I used your card by mistake. I take full responsibility." He believed her. He didn't know why, but he did. Maybe it was the directness of her gaze, the lack of performance in her posture. Or maybe it was the fact that she'd bought crayons instead of anything else. Art therapy, he repeated. Yes. For children with what kind of needs? Different needs. She glanced toward the hallway that led to the stairs. Motor difficulties, developmental delays, trauma. Her voice softened on the last word. Some of them just need a place to make noise without someone telling them to stop. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Lily hadn't made noise in 3 years, not since the accident. The medical team, neurologists, pediatric specialists, rehabilitation experts, had all agreed. Severe brain trauma, permanent cognitive impairment, minimal response to stimuli. The prognosis had been delivered in a conference room with leather chairs and a view of the city, each word a stone dropped into dark water. Permanent, minimal, prognosis. His daughter had become a collection of medical terms, a chart with declining numbers, a name on a care plan that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Lily doesn't respond to art therapy, he said, or music therapy, or any therapy. The specialists were very clear. Elena nodded slowly. I understand, she said, but something in her tone suggested she didn't. Not quite. I should start upstairs. Wait. The word came out harder than he'd intended. Elena stopped. Marcus set his coffee down and leaned against the counter, suddenly tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. What would you have bought if you'd been shopping for Lily? She considered the question with an intensity that surprised him. Not as if she were making something up, but as if she were weighing something she'd already thought about. Textured paper, she said finally. The kind with ridges and scented markers. Lavender, vanilla, citrus, things with strong sensory feedback. She hesitated. But I'm not a therapist, and I don't know your daughter's full medical history. She doesn't move, Marcus said. The words tasted bitter. She doesn't speak. She barely blinks. The neurologist said her capacity for purposeful interaction is... He stopped. He'd said this so many times it had become a script, a defense against hope. It's been 3 years. I know, Elena said quietly, and then softer. I've been watching her. The fog outside pressed closer. Somewhere upstairs, the nurse's shoes clicked across hardwood. Marcus felt the house settle around them, that vast, expensive silence that money could buy but couldn't fill. Watching her? How? Just watching. Elena's gaze didn't waver. May I show you something? They went upstairs together, which felt strange. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd walked these halls with someone who wasn't medical staff. Elena moved ahead of him, her steps soundless in soft-soled shoes, and stopped outside Lily's room. Through the half-open door, he could see his daughter in her wheelchair by the window, positioned exactly as the nurse had left her. Sunlight caught the fine blonde hair that hung to her shoulders. Her hands rested on the armrests, fingers slightly curled. Her head tilted to the left, always to the left, where the window showed nothing but sky and the tops of elm trees. The nurse, a stern woman named Mrs. Kovac, looked up from her tablet. Mr. Holloway, is something wrong? No, Marcus said. Elena wanted to... He realized he didn't actually know what Elena wanted. She had a question. Mrs. Kovac's expression tightened. She'd been with them for 18 months, came highly recommended, followed protocols with military precision. She also treated Lily like a very expensive piece of equipment that required specific handling and resented anyone who suggested otherwise. I've just administered her morning medications, she said. She'll need quiet for the next hour. Elena didn't argue. She simply stood in the doorway, watching Lily with that same unreadable intensity Marcus had glimpsed before. Then she said very softly, "Which window does she prefer?" Mrs. Kovac blinked. "Excuse me? This window faces east. Her afternoon position faces south. Does she show a preference?" "She doesn't show preferences," Mrs. Kovac said, each word clipped. "She has a care schedule. And the schedule determines her position." "Of course." Elena took a small step into the room. The nurse shifted, as if to block her. But Elena wasn't moving toward Lily. She was looking at the walls, at the pristine, Empty walls where nothing hung except a single abstract painting someone had chosen years ago. All muted blues and grays. Has she ever had art supplies in here? Art supplies? Mrs. Kovach's tone suggested Elena had asked if Lily needed a motorcycle. No, she lacks the motor control and cognitive awareness to engage with art materials. It would be pointless. I see, Elena said, but she was still looking at Lily, and Marcus saw it now, the thing he'd missed. The way Lily's right hand, the one slightly closer to Elena's voice, had shifted, just barely, just a twitch of the fingers, as if testing the weight of the air. Mrs. Kovach didn't notice. She was already checking her tablet again, scrolling through the day's schedule. But Marcus noticed, and when he looked at Elena, he saw that she had too. Thank you, Mrs. Kovach, Marcus said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. Elena and I need to discuss something downstairs. They left, walked down the hall in silence, descended the curved staircase with its runner of deep burgundy, crossed the foyer, and only when they reached his study, a room lined with legal texts and framed photographs of buildings he owned, did Marcus close the door and turn to her. Her hand moved, he said. Elena nodded. It's small, but yes. How long have you been seeing things like that? Since I started. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but as if holding something inside herself. Little things. Anna, the way she turns her head slightly when there's a change in sound. How her breathing shifts when someone new enters the room. Yesterday, when I was cleaning the hallway, I dropped a book. She blinked. 3 times. Rapid. Like startle response. Marcus felt his pulse in his temples. The doctors... I'm not a doctor, Elena said firmly, and I'm not suggesting I know better than your medical team. But I've worked with children before. Different situations, different needs. And what I see in Lily doesn't match what I've been told about her condition. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer. Marcus moved to the window, looked out at the grounds where gardeners kept the hedges in perfect geometric shapes. If you're wrong, he said slowly, if you're giving me false hope. I'm not giving you anything, Elena interrupted. I'm telling you what I've observed. What you do with that information is your choice. He turned back to her. What would you do? Test her, Elena said, carefully, quietly, without the nurse present. See if she responds to stimuli that aren't part of her official protocol. She paused. But I'd also ask why the protocol hasn't changed in 3 years. Most care plans evolve, adapt to progress or decline. Yours seems frozen. Marcus had never questioned it. The medical team had been clear. Lily's condition was permanent. The protocol was designed to maintain her comfort, prevent complications, manage her symptoms. Evolution implied change. Change implied possibility. Possibility implied hope. And hope, he'd learned, was the cruelest variable of all. But now he wondered. Elena didn't push. That was what surprised him most. She simply continued her work, cleaning, organizing, preparing meals, while Marcus spent the next 2 days watching his daughter with new eyes. He started arriving at Lily's room during times Mrs. Kovach stepped out. He stood in the doorway and observed. The tilt of Lily's head, the rhythm of her breathing, the position of her hands. At first he saw nothing, just his daughter, motionless and distant, exactly as she'd been for 3 years. But then, on the 3rd day, he tried something. He walked into the room and closed the door. Mrs. Kovach had gone to lunch. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of a vacuum somewhere on the first floor. Marcus pulled a chair close to Lily's wheelchair and sat down. He didn't touch her, didn't speak at first, just sat there, and breathing in the faint scent of lavender from the lotion the nurse used on her skin. Then he said very softly, Lily, if you can hear me, move your right hand. Nothing. He waited, counted his heartbeats, watched the sunlight slide across her face. Still nothing. He was about to stand, to leave, to accept that Elena had been mistaken when he saw it. The smallest twitch. Right hand, index finger. Barely perceptible. But there. His breath caught. Again, he whispered. Please, just once more. Her finger moved. Definite this time. A small curl inward, like the beginning of a fist, then release. Marcus felt his world tilt. Everything he'd been told, everything he'd accepted, everything he'd buried his grief beneath. Suddenly, none of it was solid. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Who would he call? The medical team. Mrs. Kovac? They dismiss it as involuntary movement, muscle spasm, meaningless reflex. Or worse, they'd run tests that involved sedation and scans and hours of Lily being treated like a specimen instead of a child. He thought of Elena, of her quiet certainty, of the art supplies she'd bought with his card. He found her in the kitchen, washing windows with methodical precision. "I need to know something," he said without preamble. "The children you work with, the ones in art therapy, do you keep records?" Elena set down her cloth. "The program does. Basic information, progress notes. And if I wanted to see those notes, understand the methods, you'd need to visit," she said. "The director doesn't share records outside the facility, privacy concerns." "Then I'll visit." Something flickered across her face. Not quite surprise. Maybe recognition. "Sunday afternoon," she said. 2:00. I can give you the address." "What should I look for?" Elena dried her hands slowly. "Look for the children everyone says will never improve," she said. "Then watch what happens when someone gives them something beautiful to do." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat in his study with Lily's medical files spread across his desk. 3 years of reports, evaluations, treatment notes. He read them with the attention he usually reserved for contracts, looking for gaps, inconsistencies, things that didn't align. And slowly he began to see them. Small discrepancies. A neurologist note from year 1 suggesting potential for minimal improvement with intensive intervention that was never mentioned again. A physical therapist's observation about purposeful eye tracking that disappeared from subsequent reports. Recommendations for additional testing that were marked as unnecessary given prognosis. He pulled up the credentials of Lily's current medical team. Mrs. Kovac had been hired through an agency. The agency was run by a man named Dr. Philip Voss, who specialized in long-term care for wealthy families with children who had severe disabilities. Marcus knew the type. High fees, excellent reputation, absolute discretion, the kind of operation that told parents what they needed to hear and made everything look professional while ensuring the situation remained stable. Stable meant ongoing. Ongoing meant revenue. Marcus closed the laptop and walked upstairs. The house was dark except for the nightlight in Lily's room. Mrs. Kovac slept in the adjacent suite, door closed, her own space separate from the child she monitored. He stood in Lily's doorway and watched his daughter breathe, watched the small rise and fall of her chest, the way moonlight caught in her hair. She looked peaceful, but was she peaceful or was she trapped? The question kept him awake until dawn. Sunday came wrapped in cold rain. Marcus drove himself to the community center Elena had mentioned, a squat brick building in a neighborhood where paint peeled from window frames and the streetlights flickered. He parked in a lot full of minivans and walked inside, past bulletin boards covered in construction paper announcements and hand-drawn flyers. A woman at the front desk directed him to the basement, where he heard voices and laughter echoing up the stairwell. The art room was chaos, a beautiful chaos. Children everywhere, some in wheelchairs, some with braces, some sitting on the floor with papers spread around them like fallen leaves. Colors everywhere, the sharp, clean smell of markers and tempera paint, and Elena kneeling beside a boy who couldn't have been more than 8, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold a crayon. She guided him gently, her voice low and encouraging, helping him make marks on paper that looked like nothing and everything at once. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched. He saw a girl with leg braces paint a sunset using only her mouth, brush gripped between her teeth. He saw a boy who rocked constantly cover a canvas in spirals of blue and green, his movements frantic but purposeful. He saw children who, according to their medical charts, he probably had no future, creating futures anyway, one crayon stroke at a time. Elena looked up and saw him. She said something to the boy, then stood and walked over. "You came," she said. "You were right," Marcus said, "about looking. Come meet someone." She led him to a corner where a girl sat in a wheelchair, head lolled to one side, eyes half closed. She looked completely unresponsive, but Elena knelt down, picked up a piece of textured paper, and held it near the girl's hand. Then she waited and waited, and slowly, so slowly, Marcus almost missed it. The girl's fingers extended, touched the paper, curled slightly against the ridges. "This is Maya," Elena said softly. 6 months ago, her parents were told she had no purposeful movement, no awareness, and the recommendation was full-time institutional care. She stroked Maya's arm gently. "Now she chooses colors. Watch." Elena held up 2 markers, red and blue. "Maya," she said clearly. "Which one?" The girl's eyes shifted, fixed on the blue marker. Her hand moved fractionally toward it. Elena gave it to her. "Good," she said, and there was such warmth in her voice that Marcus felt something crack in his chest. "Now make your mark." Maya's hand shook. The marker dropped twice, but Elena kept repositioning it, kept encouraging, kept believing, and finally a line appeared on the paper. Wobbly, uncertain, but a line made by choice. Marcus felt his throat tighten. "How?" he managed. "Patience," Elena said. "Consistency, and refusing to accept someone else's conclusion when your observations suggest otherwise." She looked up at him. Maya's parents fired her previous care team, hired new specialists, got a second opinion from a pediatric neurologist who actually spent time with her instead of just reading old reports. And the diagnosis was wrong. Not completely wrong. She has significant challenges, but wrong about her capacity for growth. Elena stood. The original team hadn't updated her evaluation in 2 years. They'd stopped looking for progress because they'd decided there wouldn't be any. Marcus thought of Mrs. Kovac, of Dr. Voss's agency, of 3 years without meaningful change in Lily's care protocol. "Elena," he said slowly, "do you think someone might have a reason to keep Lily's condition unchanged?" Her expression went carefully neutral. "That's not a question I can answer. But you've thought it." She was quiet for a long moment. All around them, children laughed and argued and made glorious messes. Finally, Elena said, "I think you should review your care contracts very carefully, particularly the terms regarding ongoing treatment and billing structures." Marcus drove home through rain that turned the city into a blur. He went straight to his study and pulled every document related to Lily's care. It took 4 hours, a pot of coffee, and a growing fury he hadn't felt in years. But he found it, buried in the fine print of Mrs. Kovac's employment contract. A clause that guaranteed her position and salary as long as Lily remained classified as requiring intensive, specialized care with no foreseeable reduction in support needs. Another clause in Dr. Voss's agency agreement, annual bonuses tied to client retention and continuation of long-term care arrangements. Once they had a financial incentive to keep Lily dependent, to keep her unchanging, to keep her exactly as she was. Marcus picked up his phone and called his attorney. Mrs. Kovac was fired on Monday morning. She didn't go quietly. She stood in the foyer with her bags packed and her face rigid with indignation, threatening legal action, defamation suits, regulatory complaints. Marcus listened to all of it with the cold patience of a man who'd negotiated with people far more dangerous than a disgruntled nurse. "You've cared for my daughter for 18 months, he said, when she finally paused for breath. "In that time, her care plan hasn't changed once. Not one adjustment, not one new goal. Can you explain that?" Mrs. Kovac's mouth tightened. "Her condition is static. The neurologist who works for Dr. Voss's agency," Marcus interrupted. "The same agency that employs you. The same agency that has a financial interest in keeping patients exactly as they are." "That's absurd." "Is it?" Marcus pulled out a folder. "Because I've spent the weekend reviewing billing records. Your agency charges for specialized care, top tier, but the actual interventions Lily receives, the daily routine, the medications, the therapy sessions, they haven't evolved since month 3. You're billing for intensive treatment while providing maintenance care." Mrs. Kovac's face flushed. "Your daughter is severely impaired. We provided excellent care within the parameters of her condition. Her condition that you had every reason to keep severe." Marcus took a step closer. Tell me, Mrs. Kovach, in 18 months, did you ever once test whether Lily could respond to new stimuli? Did you ever try changing her environment, introducing new sensory experiences, seeing if she could make choices? That's not protocol. Protocol, Marcus said quietly, is what you hide behind when you stop caring about the patient. He gestured to the door. You're done. I've arranged for new nursing staff through a different agency. They'll arrive this afternoon. You have 10 minutes to collect anything personal from Lily's room, and then I want you gone. You'll regret this, Mrs. Kovach said, her voice shaking with anger. When you realize your daughter is exactly what we've told you she is, when this fantasy you're building collapses, you'll see that Dr. Voss and I gave you the truth. We gave you stability. You gave me despair, Marcus said, and billed me for it. After Mrs. Kovach left, the house felt different, lighter. Marcus went upstairs to find Elena already in Lily's room, rearranging things. The sterile medical equipment had been pushed to the corners. The abstract painting was gone from the wall. In its place, taped at Lily's eye level, were pieces of construction paper in bright colors. Red, yellow, green, blue. The new nurse will be here at 3, Marcus said from the doorway. Elena nodded, smoothing a piece of textured fabric across the arm of Lily's wheelchair. I brought some things, sensory materials, if you don't mind. I don't mind. He moved into the room, knelt beside his daughter. Lily's head was turned toward the window as always, but when he said her name very softly, her eyes shifted, found his face, held there for a heartbeat before drifting away. Marcus felt his chest constrict. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't see this sooner. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, just briefly. Just enough. You're seeing it now, she said. The new nurse was a young woman named Sarah who came with recommendations from a pediatric rehabilitation specialist Marcus had consulted over the weekend. She assessed Lily with gentle efficiency, asking questions about what had been tried, what hadn't, what responses Marcus had observed. She didn't dismiss anything, didn't tell him what was or wasn't possible, just listened and made notes in neat handwriting. I'd like to bring in a colleague, Sarah said after an hour. Dr. Chen. She specializes in reevaluating children with brain injuries who've been in static care situations. She's seen cases where initial diagnoses were incomplete. How soon can she come? Tomorrow, if you'd like. Dr. Chen arrived carrying a bag of toys and tools that looked more like playground equipment than medical instruments. She was in her 50s, wore comfortable shoes, and spoke to Lily the way Elena did, as if she were absolutely certain the child could understand. She spent 3 hours with Lily, testing, observing, trying different approaches while Sarah and Marcus watched. Your daughter has been very poorly served, Dr. Chen said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. The initial diagnosis was likely accurate for the immediate post-accident period. Severe trauma, significant impairment, but neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, especially in children, means that initial diagnosis should never have remained static for 3 years. She pulled up images on her tablet. I'm seeing clear evidence of purposeful response, eye tracking, selective attention, motor planning, albeit limited. These are not reflexes. These are choices. Marcus felt his hands shake. What does that mean? It means Lily is in there, Dr. Chen said gently, trapped behind limitations that may be partly physical, partly learned helplessness from years of not being asked to respond. It means we have work to do, intensive work, therapy that challenges her safely, builds on small successes, gives her reasons to engage. She paused. But Mr. Holloway, I need you to understand. This isn't a miracle. Lily has real challenges. She may never walk, may never speak normally. We're talking about incremental progress, not transformation. I understand, Marcus said. And he did. He wasn't looking for his daughter to become someone she wasn't. He just wanted a chance to know who she actually was. The work began immediately. Dr. Chen created a new care plan, ambitious but realistic. Physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy focused on hand function, speech therapy even though Lily couldn't speak, because the specialist believed she might learn to communicate through other means, and art therapy, Elena's suggestion, colors and textures and the freedom to make marks that meant something only to Lily. Elena stayed on, though Marcus had offered to release her from housekeeping duties entirely. She refused. "I'll keep my regular hours," she said. "But if you need help with the Lily sessions, I'm available." She was there often, in the playroom that was slowly being transformed from a sterile holding space into something alive. She'd bring materials, fabrics with different textures, bells that chimed at different pitches, scented Play-Doh, paper that crinkled or stayed silent. She'd sit with Lily and offer choices, then wait with infinite patience for the small signs of preference. A shift of gaze, a movement of fingers, the softest sound in the back of Lily's throat, and slowly, incrementally, Lily began to emerge. 6 weeks after Mrs. Kovach's dismissal, Lily chose a crayon for the first time. Elena had laid out 3, red, yellow, blue, on the tray of her wheelchair. She'd asked Lily to pick one, and Lily's hand, shaking with effort, had moved toward the red, knocked it off the tray, then tried again, eerie with Elena's gentle guidance, until her fingers closed around it. Marcus had been in the doorway, had seen it happen, had walked to his study afterward, and wept into his hands like a man breaking apart and being rebuilt at the same time. The victories stayed small, but they multiplied. Lily began to track objects with her eyes more consistently, started to turn her head deliberately towards sounds, made sounds of her own, not words, not yet, but vocalizations that seemed tied to specific situations. Frustration had a different tone than contentment. Interest sounded different from boredom. Dr. Chen visited weekly, adjusting the care plan, adding new goals. "She's progressing faster than I expected," she admitted one afternoon. "I think being in a home environment helps. No clinical sterility. More natural interactions." "Elena helps," Marcus said. "Elena is remarkable," Dr. Chen agreed. "She has instincts most people have to be trained for years to develop." Marcus had noticed that too. The way Elena seemed to understand what Lily needed before anyone else did. The way she could read the tiny changes in his daughter's expression, the shifts in tension that signaled discomfort or interest or fatigue. He'd started watching Elena the way he'd watched Lily, carefully, observantly, trying to understand how she did what she did. And somewhere in those weeks, something else had shifted. He found himself looking for Elena when she wasn't in a room, listening for her voice, noticing the efficient grace in the way she moved, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the warmth she showed his daughter that she never quite showed him. She kept a careful distance, professional, appropriate, but sometimes he'd catch her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not pity, not judgment, something softer, something that made his chest ache. One evening, after Lily had been put to bed and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Marcus found Elena in the kitchen preparing Lily's meals for the next day. He poured 2 glasses of wine without asking and set one beside her. "I never thanked you," he said. Elena's hand stilled. "For what?" "For seeing what I couldn't, for refusing to accept the story I'd been told." He leaned against the counter. "For buying art supplies with my card." She smiled slightly. "That was an accident." "Was it?" He wasn't sure anymore. Wasn't sure anything about Elena was accidental. "I looked into you," he admitted. After you started noticing things about Lily. I wanted to know who you were." Elena's expression didn't change. "And what did you find?" "Not much. You don't exist on social media, no digital footprint to speak of. But I found references, letters of recommendation from families you'd worked for before. All of them said the same thing, that you had an extraordinary gift for seeing children others had given up on." "I don't have a gift," Elena said quietly. "I just pay attention. It's more than that." Marcus took a sip of wine, trying to find the right words. "You gave my daughter back to me. You gave me hope when I thought I was done with hope. I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Elena set down the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables, turned to face him fully. You don't have to thank me, Marcus. Lily is a beautiful soul who deserves someone to really see her. That's all I did." "You did more." He set his glass down. "And The words stuck. He'd spent 3 years building walls, teaching himself not to feel, not to want, not to imagine anything beyond the narrow corridor of his grief. But Elena had walked into that corridor with her quiet certainty and her art supplies and her refusal to accept limits. And now the walls were crumbling. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "Do what?" "Feel this way about someone again." The kitchen went very still. Elena didn't move closer, didn't pull away, just stood there with something uncertain and hopeful and scared flickering across her face. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm your employee, Lily's caregiver. Whatever this is, it complicates everything." "I know. And Lily has to come first. Always." "I know that too." He took a careful step toward her. "But Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm not confused. I'm not grateful in some inappropriate way. He stopped, let himself say it. "I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know what to do about it except tell you the truth." Elena closed her eyes, breathed. When she opened them again, there were tears at the corners. "I care about you," she said. "Both of you. But we can't, not while I'm working here. It wouldn't be right." "Then don't work here." The words came out before he could stop them. "I mean, stay with Lily, please. She needs you. But not as staff, as," he didn't have a word for it, "is someone who's part of her life because you want to be. Because you care. Not because I'm paying you. Marcus, I'll hire someone else to do the cleaning, the cooking. Whatever you've been doing that isn't about Lily. But I want you here because you choose to be. Because this," he gestured around them at the house that had been a mausoleum and was slowly becoming a home again. "Because this matters to you." Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What if Lily stops progressing? What if we've reached her limit? Then we'll love her exactly as she is." Marcus meant it. He'd learned that much. "But either way, I want you here. If you want to be here." Elena reached out slowly, took his hand. Her fingers were warm, real. "I want to be here," she whispered. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Marcus sat in Lily's playroom and watched his daughter paint. Her movements were still labored, still required Sarah's gentle guidance. But the marks she made were intentional, purposeful. She chose colors deliberately. Today it was purple and gold, streaks across paper that looked like sunrise or bruises or something only she understood. Elena sat on the floor nearby, organizing new art supplies. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She wasn't staff anymore, hadn't been for months. She lived in the East Wing now, in rooms that had sat empty for years, and split her time between helping with Lily and running the community art program she'd expanded with funding Marcus had provided. They hadn't defined what they were to each other yet, hadn't needed to. Some things didn't require definitions. "See," Lily made a sound, a pleased hum that she'd started using when something satisfied her. Marcus looked at Elena and smiled. Elena smiled back, and for a moment, the house felt exactly right. Later, after Lily had been cleaned up and settled for her afternoon rest, Marcus found Elena on the terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades his daughter would probably try to capture tomorrow. Elena leaned against the railing, looking out over the grounds. "Dr. Chen wants to try communication cards next month," she said when Marcus joined her. "Ambitious. She thinks Lily's receptive language is stronger than we've realized, that with the right tools she might be able to express more than we think." Elena glanced at him. "Are you ready for that? To know what my daughter thinks? To hear her opinions?" Marcus laughed softly. "Terrifying, but yes." They stood together in the cooling air. Somewhere in the house, Sarah was singing to Lily, a lullaby in a language Marcus didn't recognize, but that always seemed to calm his daughter. The garden smelled like roses and cut grass. The sky deepened from gold to pink, to the first hint of purple. "I never thanked you," Elena said suddenly. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For seeing me." She turned to face him. "For trusting me when I told you something impossible. For risking hope when hope was dangerous. For," her voice caught, "for letting me love her, and for letting me love you." Marcus reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. That art supply receipt, he said. That supposedly accidental purchase. Did you know I'd see it? Elena's expression went carefully neutral. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. He pulled her closer. I think you knew exactly what you were doing when you took my card. Knew I'd check the account. Knew I'd ask questions. I think you saw my daughter being slowly erased and decided to do something about it. That's a very romantic interpretation, Elena said softly. Is it wrong? She didn't answer immediately, just looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. Then she smiled. Does it matter? And he realized it didn't. Whether it had been accident or design, whether Elena had orchestrated his awakening or simply been there when it happened, none of that mattered. What mattered was that his daughter was learning to choose colors. What mattered was that his house was full of sound again. What mattered was this woman in his arms who'd refused to accept the story everyone else had believed. Inside, Lily laughed. A small, breathy sound, but a laugh. Marcus and Elena turned together, drawn by it like moths to flame. Through the glass doors, they could see Sarah spinning Lily's wheelchair in slow circles, and Lily's face, his daughter's beautiful face, was lit with something that looked like joy. She's really here, Marcus whispered. She always was, Elena said. We just had to learn how to listen. The sun dropped below the horizon. The sky went dark. But the house glowed with warm light, and somewhere in that light, a child who'd been lost was finding her way back. Not to who she'd been before. That girl was gone, taken by an accident no one could undo. But to who she was now, who she was becoming, and that, what Marcus thought, was its own kind of miracle. The quiet kind, the kind you had to pay attention to see, the kind that looked like $73 worth of art supplies and tasted like hope. He kissed Elena on the terrace while his daughter laughed inside, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Holloway believed in the future again. What did you think of Marcus and Elena's journey? Of Lily's quiet awakening? Stories like these remind us that sometimes the most profound changes happen in whispers, not shouts. In the small choices we make to really see the people in front of us. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about the power of paying attention, of refusing to accept someone else's limits, of finding love in unexpected places, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Want to drop a comment below and tell me, what moment resonated with you most? Was it Elena's courage, Marcus's transformation, or Lily's first intentional choice? And if you're here because you crave more stories like this, stories about second chances, quiet heroism, and the kind of love that changes everything, then you're in exactly the right place. This channel is dedicated to heartwarming stories that restore your faith in people, in persistence, and in the beautiful messiness of real human connection. Subscribe now so you never miss a story. Hit that notification bell and join our community of people who believe that hope isn't naive. It's necessary. Every day we bring you new narratives about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about love that heals, and about the small moments that change everything. Thank you for spending this time with Marcus, Elena, and Lily. Thank you for believing along with them that it's never too late to start looking closer. I'll see you in the next story.